Welcome to the peaceful space of sleep-friendly science, where the oldest stories of humanity are not shouted from headlines, but whispered from the earth itself on the quiet night air. Tonight, we journey to a place that has rewritten the very first chapter of human civilization. It is a puzzle made of stone and time, a question asked 12,000 years ago that we are only now beginning to hear. Allow your curiosity to be a soft light, illuminating a world that history forgot. Now settle in, take a deep breath, and let the soft sounds guide you as we begin tonight's journey into the unknown. Section 1: The Potbelly Hill. Our story begins not with a king or a battle, but with the land itself. Picture in your mind a sweep of earth in what is now southeastern Turkey, not far from the ancient city of Sanliurfa, a place steeped in prophets and legends. The landscape here is vast and patient. It is a series of rolling limestone plateaus, baked by 10,000 summers into shades of honey, ochre, and pale gold. It is a land that seems to hold its breath under a vast open sky. The silence here is not empty. It is resonant, filled with the whisper of the wind across dry grasses and the weight of a human history so deep it is measured not in centuries, but in millennia. For as long as anyone could remember, a particular hill stood on the horizon. It was not a dramatic peak or a jagged cliff. It was a gentle, rounded swelling of the earth, a soft curve against the sharp line of the distant mountains. In the local language, it was known as Göbekli Tepe. The name is simple, almost comically mundane. It means Potbelly Hill. And for generations that is all it was. A landmark. A place where shepherds might rest their flocks, seeking the shade of the single lonely mulberry tree that grew at its summit. Local people saw the hill as an old and quiet place, perhaps a cemetery, a place of endings. They would tie scraps of cloth to the branches of the wishing tree, whispering prayers into the wind. They knew it was a sacred place, but they could never have guessed the scale of the truth sleeping just beneath their feet. The hill itself is the first clue in our puzzle, because it is not, you see, a natural hill at all. It is what archaeologists call a tell. A tell is a hill made by people. It is built up over centuries, even thousands of years, as generations live and build and abandon their homes, one on top of the other, each layer of dust and rubble and memory raising the ground level just a little higher. A tell is not a monument. It is a layered archive of life. And Potbelly Hill was a particularly large one, rising some 15 meters or 50 feet from the surrounding plateau. The very ground here was a human creation. In the 1960s, a team of archaeologists from Chicago surveyed this region. They came to Göbekli Tepe. They walked its gentle slopes. They saw what the shepherds saw: countless fragments of flint tools, evidence of Stone Age activity. They saw large broken slabs of limestone poking through the soil. They consulted their maps and their knowledge, and they came to a logical, but profoundly wrong, conclusion. They believed the hill was a natural feature, and that the limestone slabs were the broken markers of a long-forgotten medieval cemetery. The flint was just background noise, the scattered debris of ancient peoples who had passed through. They labeled it a place of minor interest, a disturbed graveyard, and they moved on. The secret of Potbelly Hill was not ready to be told. It would sleep for another 30 years under the Turkish sun. Imagine lying on the warm earth of that hill in the early 1990s, before the great work began. You would feel the gentle curve of the ground beneath you. You would see the flint chips glinting in the light, sharp-edged remnants of a time beyond memory. You would see the tops of huge, shaped limestone blocks, which looked for all the world like ancient headstones. You would have no reason to doubt the first assessment: a place of the dead. But the story of a place is not always written on its surface. Sometimes you must listen for what is buried. The stones on this hill were not tombstones marking the end of individual lives. They were something else entirely. They were the very tips of something colossal. The bones of a different kind of giant. A creation so old and so unexpected, it would completely overturn our understanding of the ancient world. The hill was not a cemetery. It was a cathedral. And it was not just sleeping, it was waiting. It was waiting for a different kind of eye, for a mind that was prepared to see not a place of endings, but the very beginning of a new kind of human story. The secret was safe, hidden in plain sight, disguised as a potbelly and a forgotten graveyard. Section 2. A scholar's suspicion. 30 years is but a moment for a hill like this. For 3 decades after the first cursory survey, Göbekli Tepe continued its quiet sleep, its secrets undisturbed. The wind whispered to the mulberry tree, the shepherds tied their prayers to its branches, and the great stones dreamed in the earth. But the world of archaeology had not been sleeping. Knowledge had grown. New discoveries had been made. And a different kind of mind was about to turn its gaze upon Potbelly Hill. Our story now welcomes its central human character. Not a king or a warrior, but a quiet, thoughtful German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt. You must picture him, a man with a deep and specific passion. His life's work was the study of the early Neolithic period, that blurry transitional dawn when humanity was just beginning to experiment with a new way of life. He was, in particular, a master of stone tools. Where others saw simple rocks, he saw signatures. He could read a piece of flint like a page of text, discerning the skill of the hand that made it and the purpose for which it was intended. In the early 1990s, Schmidt had been working at another site not too far away, a place called Navali Quarry. This was a settlement from that same early Neolithic period. And there at Navali Quarry, he had helped unearth something remarkable. A small rectangular shrine containing tall, carved limestone pillars with a distinctive T-shape, like stylized human figures. It was a fascinating discovery, a glimpse into the ritual life of the first farmers. But Navali Quarry was a village. It had rectangular houses, domestic tools. The shrine was part of a known way of life. In 1994, seeking new sites to survey, Schmidt was reading through old archaeological reports. He came across the brief, dismissive notes from the 1960s survey of Göbekli Tepe. The report mentioned the vast quantities of flint. It mentioned the broken gravestones. Something about the description snagged in his expert mind. The sheer amount of flint debris described didn't sound like a place people simply passed through. It sounded like a factory, a place of intense focus work. And the description of the stones, it sparked a flicker of recognition, a suspicion. He decided he had to see it for himself. Imagine the day Klaus Schmidt first walked up the slope of Potbelly Hill. It is autumn. The air is clear and dry. The sun is warm on his back. He sees the same landscape as the archaeologists before him. The same lonely tree, the same golden grasses. But he is seeing it with different eyes. He is not looking for a graveyard. He is looking for a pattern. He bends down and picks up a piece of flint. It is not a rough, simple tool. It is a masterpiece of prehistoric craftsmanship, a beautifully made point or a scraper. He looks around. The ground is not just scattered with them. It is carpeted. He realizes that in a few minutes of walking, he has seen more high-quality flint tools than are often found at entire Neolithic settlements. This was not the work of a few passing nomads. This was the sign of a massive, coordinated, and sustained human presence. This hill had been a hive of activity. Then his eyes turned to the large limestone slabs, the ones the previous report had called headstones. He walks over to one. He runs his hand over its weathered surface. He does not see a random broken piece of rock. He sees evidence of shaping. He sees deliberate angles. And then he sees it. The unmistakable, elegant, and world-changing T-shape. The same shape he had seen at Navali Quarry. But here the scale was completely different. The tops of these pillars were huge, far larger than the ones in the small shrine he knew. He realized he was not looking at broken headstones. He was looking at the very tops of colossal monolithic pillars, buried almost completely in the earth. He was seeing just the tips of their heads, peeking up from the soil. In that moment, a profound and revolutionary idea began to form in his mind. An idea so audacious it bordered on fantasy. The flint tools told him the age of the site. They belonged to a time before pottery, before writing, before the wheel. They belonged to a time before agriculture and permanent settlement, the era of the hunter-gatherer. And the T-shaped pillars told him the purpose of the site. This was not a place for the living, a village like Navali Kori. There were no signs of domestic houses, no hearths, no grinding stones for grain. The sheer number of pillars suggested a vast complex. This place, he suspected, was purely for ritual, for ceremony, for belief. The two pieces of evidence clicked together in his mind to form a picture that, according to all the history books, was impossible. Hunter-gatherers were supposed to be simple, nomadic people, living in small bands, too preoccupied with the daily struggle for survival to organize on a mass scale or create monumental architecture. Civilization, the story went, began with farming. First came agriculture, which led to surplus food, which allowed for settled villages, which grew into towns and cities, and only then, with all that in place, did people have the time, the resources, and the social structure to build temples. Klaus Schmidt, standing on that quiet, pot-bellied hill, realized the story might be completely backwards. He suspected he was standing on the roof of the world's first temple. A temple built not by settled farmers, but by the wandering hunters of the last ice age. He knew that if he was right, this lonely hill would rewrite the very first chapter of human history. The hill was not a graveyard. It was a sanctuary. And the stones were not monuments to the dead. They were monuments to the gods. He knew that his life's work was not to be found in any book, but was waiting for him here, just under the skin of this pot-bellied hill. Section 3. A forest of carved stone. With a suspicion this grand, the only way forward is to begin to dig. To ask the earth to show you its secrets. In 1995, under the quiet guidance of Klaus Schmidt, and with the permission of the Turkish authorities, the first real excavation of Göbekli Tepe began. It was not a rushed or violent process. It was one of quiet patience, of slow revelation. Imagine a team of archaeologists and local workers, kneeling on the warm ground of that hill day after day, week after week. They are not using bulldozers or heavy machinery. They are using trowels and soft brushes, gently, painstakingly, peeling back the skin of the hill, layer by layer. They are moving backward in time with every scrape of the trowel, with every bucket of soil that is sifted and examined. The first areas they chose to investigate were around the tips of those great T-shaped pillars that Schmidt had recognized. As they dug, the hill slowly, reluctantly, began to give up its secrets. The first thing that became clear was the sheer scale of the buried stones. What had looked like headstones were, in fact, monolithic pillars of limestone, some standing 3, 4, even 5 meters tall. As the soil was cleared away, it was like watching a giant slowly rising from a long sleep, stretching its great stone limbs. And then, as more of the earth was cleared, the true nature of the structure began to emerge. The pillars were not standing alone. They were part of enormous circular enclosures. Picture it in your mind. A ring of these massive T-shaped pillars, facing inward, as if in silent communion. They were connected by walls of rough, unworked stone, creating a distinct sacred space, a room open to the sky. And in the center of this circle, stood 2 even larger T-shaped pillars, towering over all the others, like the chief guardians or the high priests of this stone congregation. As the team excavated, they didn't just find one of these circles. They found another, and another, and another, nestled into the hillside, one beside the other. The geophysical surveys, which use ground-penetrating radar to see what lies buried without digging, revealed that there were at least 20 of these enclosures in total, scattered across the hill. A vast and complex network of sacred spaces. Potbelly Hill was not just a temple, it was a temple complex, a cathedral of the Stone Age. And these were not plain blank stones. As the archaeologists brushed away the last of the caked on earth, a new and breathtaking layer of the mystery was revealed. The pillars were covered in carvings, exquisite, detailed, and deeply enigmatic reliefs of the world these people knew. This was not simple graffiti. This was a masterwork of prehistoric art, a picture book from a lost world. But the creatures carved on these pillars were not the ones you might expect. They were not the gentle gazelle, the wild sheep, or the other animals that these people hunted for food. Instead, the pillars swarmed with a different kind of life. A menagerie of the dangerous, the venomous, the powerful. There were long slithering snakes, writhing up the sides of the pillars. There were snarling foxes, their teeth bared. There were scorpions, their tails arched and ready to strike. There were powerful wild boars, vultures with huge wingspans, and what appeared to be lions or leopards, prowling in low relief on the stone. It was a world of threatening predatory power, carved into the very architecture of their most sacred space. It was as if they had gathered all the fears of their world and given them a place of honor, staring at them from all sides. A pantheon of dangerous animals. And the T-shaped pillars themselves, what were they? As the team uncovered more of them, the details became clearer. On the sides of some of the pillars, they found carvings of arms, running down from the shoulders of the T-shape. The hands were depicted with long, thin fingers, pointing towards the front, their hands resting above what appeared to be carved belts and loincloths. It became clear that the pillars were not just pillars. They were abstract, stylized statues of human-like beings. They were stone people. Silent, anonymous, headless figures gathered in circles for eternity. Perhaps they were ancestors. Perhaps they were gods. Or perhaps they were the worshippers themselves, captured forever in stone. Standing in one of these newly excavated enclosures must have felt like stepping into another reality. You would be surrounded by a forest of carved stone. The silent, T-shaped beings would tower over you, their bodies covered in a writhing mass of dangerous animals, their faceless heads silhouetted against the vast Turkish sky. In the center, the two enormous central pillars would dominate your view, their presence immense and powerful. You would feel a sense of profound awe, and perhaps a shiver of fear. You would know without any doubt that you were in a place of immense power and deep, deep meaning. You were standing inside the mind of the Ice Age hunter. And that mind was far more complex, far more spiritual, and far more artistically brilliant than anyone had ever dared to imagine. Section 4. The Impossible Timeline. Standing there in your mind's eye, within one of these unearthed circles, surrounded by a silent congregation of stone ancestors and their menagerie of fierce animals, a single powerful question begins to form. It moves past the initial awe of what this place is, and lands on a much deeper, more unsettling question. When? When did these faceless figures first gather on this lonely hill? When did these hunters, these artists, carve their fears and their reverence into the living rock? The answer to this question is what elevates Göbekli Tepe from a magnificent discovery into a complete rewriting of our past. It is the key that unlocks the central puzzle. To find the age of a place like this, you cannot ask the stones themselves. Limestone, ancient as it is, cannot tell you when it was carved. Instead, you must listen to the whispers of the life that moved around them. Archaeologists use a beautiful and elegant method called radiocarbon dating. Think of it as a clock, given to every living thing by the universe itself. While an organism is a living tree, an animal, a personate takes in carbon from the atmosphere. A tiny, predictable fraction of that carbon is a special, unstable version called carbon-14. When the organism dies, it stops taking in new carbon, and the clock begins to tick. The unstable carbon-14 begins to decay, disappearing at a perfectly steady, known rate. By measuring how much of this ghost carbon is left in a piece of charcoal from a fire, or an animal bone left from a meal, scientists can calculate, with remarkable precision, how long ago that fire went out or that animal died. And so, the team at Göbekli Tepe began to collect these messengers from the past. They found fragments of charcoal embedded in the fill used to build the walls. They found the bones of wild animals, butchered and eaten during great feasts that took place within the enclosures. They sent these precious, time-keeping fragments to laboratories, and they waited for the clock to speak. When the numbers came back, they were so old they seemed at first to be in error. The results from the deepest, oldest layers of Göbekli Tepe clustered around 9,500 BC. That is 11,500 years ago. Let that number settle in your mind. It is a span of time so vast it is difficult to grasp. It is a number that shattered the entire timeline of human civilization, as it had been understood for over a century. To feel the true weight of this date, you must place it in context. Let us use the monuments you know as our yardsticks. Think of Stonehenge, that famous ring of giants on the Salisbury Plain in England. A place of deep mystery and ancient power. Stonehenge was built around 3000 to 2500 BC. Göbekli Tepe's oldest enclosures are more than 6,000 years older. The gap in time between the building of Göbekli Tepe and the building of Stonehenge is longer than the gap between the building of Stonehenge and you sitting here tonight. It is not just a little older. It belongs to a different universe of human history. Now think of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. It was built around 2570 BC. A testament to the immense power and organizational skill of the pharaohs. Göbekli Tepe is almost 7,000 years older than the pyramids. The entire span of recorded history from the first kings of Egypt, through the empires of Greece and Rome, all the way to the modern digital age could fit comfortably into the time that separates Göbekli Tepe from the pyramids. This monument was built before the invention of pottery, before the invention of writing, before the invention of the wheel. It was built by people who had no metal tools to help them. They had only flint, obsidian, wood, and bone. They quarried, moved, and erected pillars weighing up to 20 tons with nothing more than stone hammers, wooden levers, ropes, and the coordinated strength of human muscle. And this brings us to the heart of the impossibility, the central puzzle that Klaus Schmidt first recognized on that autumn day. The people who accomplished this staggering feat of engineering, art, and organization were, by all previous definitions, primitive hunter-gatherers. The story of civilization, the one taught in every school, was a simple and logical ladder of progress. First, about 10,000 years ago, people invented agriculture. This was the Great Revolution. Farming created a surplus of food. Surplus food allowed people to abandon their nomadic ways and settle down in permanent villages. These villages grew. Society became more complex. A division of labor appeared. Some people were farmers, others were artisans, and some became priests and leaders. This social hierarchy was the engine that could organize and command the vast labor forces needed to create monumental structures like temples and pyramids. Civilization was the child of agriculture. Göbekli Tepe throws this entire ladder into chaos. It turns the sequence completely upside down. The radiocarbon dates are clear. The great enclosures were built before a settled, agricultural way of life had begun. The evidence on the hill itself confirms this. In the oldest layers, there are no signs of domesticated plants. All the seeds found are from wild species. There are no signs of domesticated animals. Every one of the tens of thousands of animal bones found is from a wild species. Gazelles, boars, sheep, deer. There are no houses, no granaries, no evidence that anyone ever lived permanently on the hill. So how? How could wandering bands of hunter-gatherers, people we assumed lived in small egalitarian groups of a few dozen, come together to achieve something on this scale? How did they quarry monolithic pillars from the bedrock, some weighing as much as 3 city buses, and move them hundreds of meters to the top of the hill? How did they organize the labor of what must have been hundreds of people, from many different clans, speaking perhaps many different dialects? How did they feed this workforce without farms to supply the food? How did they sustain this project not for a single season but for what appears to be centuries, even millennia? This is the great puzzle of Göbekli Tepe. It presents us with a creation that should not exist. A monumental temple built by people who lacked all the supposed prerequisites for building one. It is as if you found a beautifully engineered smartphone lying next to the fossil of a dinosaur. The two things don't belong in the same world, in the same timeline. Göbekli Tepe asks us to tear up the old story. It suggests that the human spirit, the drive to create, to worship, to come together in shared belief, was not a luxury afforded by civilization. It may, in fact, have been the very thing that created it. Section 5. A world without farms. To even begin to approach the puzzle of Göbekli Tepe, to understand how a monument so grand could be built by a people we thought so simple, we must first try to see the world through their eyes. We must let go of our modern image of a harsh, unforgiving Stone Age, a desperate daily struggle for survival. The evidence from Göbekli Tepe itself, and from the wider region, invites us into a very different world. It asks us to imagine a time before the plow, before the fence, before the very idea of owning the land. A time when the earth itself was a garden. The world of 12,000 years ago, at the very end of the last ice age, was in a state of profound transition. The great glaciers that had covered much of the northern hemisphere were in their final retreat. The climate was warming, becoming wetter and more stable. And the place where Göbekli Tepe stands was part of a region we now call the Fertile Crescent. Today this land can seem arid, a landscape of dry hills and dusty plains. But then it was a paradise for a hunter-gatherer. Picture a landscape lusher than the one you see today. Imagine open woodlands of pistachio and almond trees, their branches heavy with nuts. Picture vast, rolling grasslands, thick with the wild ancestors of the very grains that would later feed the world. Wild einkorn wheat, wild barley, wild rye, they grew not in cultivated fields, but in immense natural meadows, their seeds available to anyone with the knowledge to gather them. This was not farming. It was harvesting from a pantry that nature herself kept perpetually stocked. And through these woodlands and grasslands moved vast herds of animals. This was a world teeming with life. Herds of gazelle, sometimes numbering in the thousands, migrated across the plains, their movements predictable with the changing seasons. Wild sheep and goats navigated the rocky hillsides. Wild boar and enormous wild cattle, known as aurochs, moved through the forests of oak and terebinth trees that grew in the valleys. The rivers were rich with fish and waterfowl. For a skilled and knowledgeable hunter, this was a world not of scarcity, but of incredible, almost unimaginable abundance. This changes everything. The hunter-gatherers of Göbekli Tepe were not the desperate, half-starved figures of our old imagination. They were, perhaps, some of the most successful and well-off people who have ever lived. They were affluent foragers. They had a deep, intimate, and encyclopedic knowledge of their environment. They knew the seasonal rhythms of every plant, the migration routes of every animal, the properties of every type of stone and wood. Their survival depended not on brute force, but on a profound intelligence and a spiritual connection to the world that provided for them. This abundance is the first part of the answer to our puzzle. It helps to explain how they could feed a large workforce. A grand construction project like Göbekli Tepe was likely a seasonal affair. It might have taken place in the autumn, after the wild grains had been harvested, and when the great gazelle herds were migrating through the region. Different clans, different bands of hunters, could have gathered at the hill at this time of plenty, bringing with them smoked meats, dried fruits, and stores of wild cereals. The construction of the temple was not a daily grind, but a great seasonal festival of work and worship, fueled by the bounty of a landscape that was, for a time, a hunter's Eden. We can see the evidence of this bounty in the debris left behind. Archaeologists have analyzed over 100,000 animal bone fragments from the site. There is not a single sign of starvation or nutritional stress on these bones. These people were healthy and well-fed. And the sheer number of bones tells a story of feasting on a truly epic scale, which we will return to. This vision of a hunter's paradise also helps us understand why they might have felt the need to build such a place. In a world of such natural generosity, your relationship with the environment is not one of domination. It is one of negotiation. The animals, the plants, the sky, the seasons, these are not resources to be exploited. They are powerful forces, spiritual beings that you must respect, appease, and enter into a relationship with. You do not thank a field you have planted. You thank the spirit of the wheat for offering itself to you. You do not celebrate your mastery over an animal. You honor the spirit of the gazelle for giving its life so that you might live. Göbekli Tepe, then, can be seen as a product of this worldview. It was perhaps a place to gather and give thanks for the world's abundance. A place to perform the rituals necessary to ensure that the seasons would continue to turn, that the wild wheat would continue to grow, that the gazelle herds would return next year. It was a monument built not out of a need to control nature, but out of a deep and abiding awe for it. It was a place for the hunters to meet with the powerful, non-human spirits that animated their world. So, when you picture the builders of Göbekli Tepe, do not picture weary, struggling survivalists. Picture a proud, strong, and deeply knowledgeable people. Picture them moving confidently through a rich and vibrant world. A world without fences. A world that provided everything they needed. They had the time, they had the food, and they had a rich, complex spiritual inner life that demanded expression. They had everything they needed to imagine a project as grand as Göbekli Tepe, and this green, fertile world gave them the physical means to make that dream a reality. Section 6. The Stone Menagerie. Let your mind now return to that circle of stone. You are standing within its sacred boundary, surrounded by the silent T-shaped figures. You have felt the impossible weight of their timeline. You have imagined the lost paradise from which their builders came. Now let us look closer. Let us quiet our thoughts about time and history for a moment, and simply see what is in front of us. Let your hand, in your imagination, drift over the cool, rough surface of one of the great limestone pillars. Trace with your finger the lines and curves that were carved with such care, with such purpose 12,000 years ago. What story did these artists want to tell? As your eyes adjust to the details, you confirm the first strange impression. This is not a celebration of the hunt. This is not a record of daily life. The gazelle, the main source of their food, is almost nowhere to be seen. The wild wheat that filled their larders is absent. There are no scenes of people gathering nuts, building huts, or tending to a fire. The art of Göbekli Tepe is concerned with something else entirely. It is a window not into their world but into their minds, into their cosmology, into their fears. The pillars are teeming with life, but it is a life of fangs and claws and venom. The fox is a recurring motif, not depicted as a clever, playful creature, but often snarling, its teeth bared in aggression. Snakes, dozens of them, wriggle and weave in complex, interlocking patterns, a symbol of danger and perhaps transformation in many cultures. The wild boar is shown not as a source of food, but as a creature of immense and dangerous power, bristling with aggression. Scorpions, small but deadly, crawl across the stone. And dominating many of the scenes are the great flying predators, the vultures, their huge wings stretched wide, as if presiding over a world of death and renewal. It is a tense, masculine, and predatory world that they chose to depict in their most sacred of places. Why? Why surround yourself with the images of the things that could kill you? We can never know for sure. But as we stand here in this silent stone circle, we can listen for the possibilities. Perhaps these creatures are guardians. Like the fierce gargoyles on a medieval cathedral, perhaps their purpose was to ward off evil, to protect the sacred space from malevolent spirits or from uninitiated intruders. They would have formed a formidable barrier of spiritual power, a warning that you were crossing a threshold into a different kind of reality, a place where the rules of the everyday world no longer applied. To enter was to enter the domain of these powerful, dangerous beings. Or perhaps the carvings represent something deeper. A map of the spirit world itself. Many hunter-gatherer societies have a shamanistic worldview, a belief that certain individuals can travel to a parallel reality, the world of the spirits, to seek healing, wisdom, or to negotiate with the forces that govern life and death. Perhaps these pillars are not just stone but cosmic charts. The T-shaped figures could be the shamans themselves, their arms outstretched in ritual posture, and the animals could be their spirit guides, or the fearsome demons they must confront on their journeys through the otherworld. In this reading, Göbekli Tepe becomes a place where the veil between worlds was thin, a portal where these epic spiritual journeys could begin or end. There is another, particularly powerful, clue. On one pillar, and in other carvings found at the site, we see a recurring image, a vulture associated with a headless human body. This has led some to a fascinating and profound hypothesis about the site's function. The practice of excarnation, exposing the body of the deceased to be consumed by scavenger birds, is known from many cultures, including in ancient Turkey. It is seen as a way to release the soul from the prison of the flesh. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was a vast mortuary complex, a place where the dead were brought, their bodies laid out on wooden platforms on top of the hill, open to the sky. And these great vultures, these sky burial priests, would descend to perform the sacred act of cleansing the bones, carrying the spirit of the departed up into the heavens. The vultures on the pillars then are not just symbols of death but of rebirth. They are the ferrymen of the soul. And what of the T-shaped pillars themselves? They are so clearly human-like, yet so powerfully abstract. They are a community of beings, but they have no faces. No eyes, no mouths, no individual character. This is surely deliberate. Perhaps it signifies that they represent not specific individuals, but the collective ancestors, the great ones from the dreamtime who founded their clans. Or perhaps they represent supernatural beings, gods so powerful that to depict their faces would be a forbidden act. In their faceless anonymity, they become every man and no man. They are pure presence, pure authority. Whatever the precise meaning, the message is clear. This was a place for dealing with the big, terrifying, and exhilarating questions of life, death, and the cosmos. The art is not decorative. It is functional. It is a tool for focusing the mind, for invoking powers, for telling the most important stories a people have. We are standing inside a mythological epic, but we have lost the key to its language. The animals, the faceless men, the strange symbols, they are the vocabulary of a lost belief system. A belief system so powerful, so compelling, that it inspired thousands of people over thousands of years to build this impossible place on a lonely, pot-bellied hill. It was a belief system that demanded more than just prayer. It demanded action. It demanded congregation. Section 7. Feasting at the World's End. The puzzle of this place deepens. We have imagined the people affluent and knowledgeable. We have stood inside their circles and felt the power of their carved gods and guardians. But the central question of how remains, hanging in the quiet air. How do you convince hundreds of people, from dozens of independent wandering bands, to set aside their own lives and come together to perform this hard, heavy, and dangerous work? There were no kings here with armies to compel them. There were no slave masters with whips. There is no evidence of a powerful state forcing its will upon a captive population. The motivation had to be voluntary. It had to come from within. So what was the incentive? What could possibly be powerful enough to draw these disparate clans together and bind them into a single cohesive workforce? The answer, it seems, is as old as humanity itself. It is the promise of community, the promise of belonging, and the promise of a really, really good party. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were brought together, it seems, by the power of the feast. As archaeologists sifted through the tons of soil used to fill the enclosures, they found more than just flint tools and fragments of the pillars. They found the discarded remnants of the meals that fueled this great undertaking. Tens of thousands of animal bones. In fact, more animal bones have been found at Göbekli Tepe than at almost any other site from this period. This was not the refuse of daily meals for a small group of residents. This was the debris from catering on a colossal scale. Imagine the scene. As the great work was underway, huge fires would have burned day and night. The air for miles around would have been thick with the smell of roasting meat. The primary animals found are gazelle and the aurochs, the enormous wild cattle of the era. The bones show the telltale butchery marks of being stripped of their meat, their marrow extracted. This was a place of epic barbecues, of communal meals that would have fed hundreds of laborers at a time. The feast was not a celebration after the work was done. The feast was the event. It was the salary. People would travel for weeks, perhaps, to come to the sacred hill, to offer their labor to the gods, and to partake in this immense, sacred, and socially binding meal. But the evidence for feasting goes beyond just the food. Scattered throughout the site, archaeologists found large, trough-like stone vessels, some capable of holding up to 160 liters, or 40 gallons of liquid. For a long time their purpose was a mystery. Were they for water? For mixing plaster? But a closer chemical analysis of the residues found inside them revealed something astonishing. Something that adds a new, intoxicating layer to our story. They found traces of compounds called oxalates. And oxalates are a telltale byproduct of the fermentation of grain. The builders of Göbekli Tepe, these hunter-gatherers from the dawn of time, were brewing beer. This was not the beer you might know today. It was likely a thick, soupy, porridge-like concoction, but it was alcoholic. It was, in essence, liquid bread, a powerful source of calories to fuel the hard labor. But it was so much more than that. In a world without writing, without many other forms of social bonding, the shared experience of drinking this sacred brew would have been a profoundly powerful social glue. It would have lowered inhibitions, encouraged camaraderie, and eased the tensions between different clans who might otherwise have been rivals. In a sacred context, this was likely no ordinary drink. It was a ritual intoxicant, a way of achieving an altered state of consciousness, of coming closer to the spirit world depicted on the pillars all around them. Göbekli Tepe may well have been the site of the world's first large-scale brewery, all in service of the gods. Picture it now. The sun is setting over the golden plains. The day's work of hauling and carving the great stones is done. Hundreds of people are gathered within the circles, their bodies tired, their spirits high. The firelight flickers across the carved faces of the scorpions and the lions, making them seem to dance and writhe in the shadows. The air is filled with the sound of chanting, of stories being told, of laughter. The great stone vats are full. The thick sacred beer is passed around. In this moment, they are not just a collection of individuals. They are a community. They are a single people, united in their work, in their belief, and in the shared sacred meal. This is how the impossible was made possible. Not through force but through faith. Not through coercion but through community. Göbekli Tepe was not just built of stone. It was built of ritual, of song, and of the shared joy and spiritual power of the feast. It tells us that the first thing we built together was not a city wall or a palace. It was a place to gather, to celebrate, and to feel a part of something larger than ourselves. Section 8. The deliberate burial. For 1,000 years, perhaps more, this was the way of things on Potbelly Hill. Generation after generation, people would make the pilgrimage. They would come to feast, to worship, and to build. The enclosures were not all built at once. They seem to have been created in succession. A circle would be used for a few centuries, and then a new one would be built nearby. The hill became a sprawling complex of these sacred rings. It was a vibrant living center of a culture that stretched across the entire region. It was the heart of their world. And then they buried it. This is, perhaps, the final and most profound mystery of Göbekli Tepe. A mystery that speaks not of beginnings but of endings. Around 8000 BC, after more than a millennium of continuous use, the people who had invested so much of their energy, their faith, and their identity into this sacred mountain chose to entomb it. They walked away, but they did not just abandon it to the winds and the rain. They did something far more deliberate, more laborious, and more deeply strange. Imagine the final act in the long drama of Göbekli Tepe. It is not an act of destruction, of war, or cataclysm. It is a slow, methodical, and strangely tender act of burial. The builders, or perhaps their great-grandchildren, began the immense task of filling in the sacred circles. They brought tons upon tons of earth, flint debris, and countless animal bones, the remnants of their final feasts, and they carefully, intentionally, filled the enclosures to the very top, until the T-shaped heads of the great pillars were covered. They were not destroying the site. They were preserving it. They were putting their gods to sleep. The scale of this undertaking is almost as difficult to comprehend as the original construction. It would have required a massive coordinated effort, just as the building did. Why would a people go to such lengths to bury their own most sacred creation? It is a question that archaeologists have wrestled with since the discovery was made. There are no written records to tell us why. There is no single, easy answer. We are left, once again, in the realm of quiet contemplation, listening for the whispers of possibility. Perhaps the belief system itself had changed. 1,000 years is a very long time. Long enough for new ideas, new gods, or new ways of understanding the cosmos to emerge. Perhaps the fierce, animalistic world depicted on the pillars no longer resonated with the people. Perhaps the gods of Göbekli Tepe had lost their power, or had become frightening in a new way. The burial then could have been a way of decommissioning the site, of sealing away old powers that were no longer welcome in the world. It was a respectful but firm closing of a chapter. Another possibility is that the world itself had changed. The climate did not remain stable. That lush, hunter's paradise was beginning to fade. The climate became drier. The great herds of gazelle may have dwindled or changed their migration routes. The wild stands of wheat may have become less reliable. The very abundance that had made Göbekli Tepe possible was coming to an end. The burial in this light could be seen as a kind of sacrifice, a desperate final offering to the gods, a plea to bring back the good times. By giving the entire temple back to the earth, perhaps they hoped the earth would once again give its bounty back to them. Or perhaps the act of burial was the final, ultimate ritual, the ultimate purpose of the temple. Some scholars have suggested that the very process of building and then burying was the point. The act of coming together, of feasting, of working in common cause, that was the true purpose. The enclosures were like immense sand mandalas, created with immense effort and then ritually destroyed, a lesson in the impermanence of all things. In this view, the burial was not an end, it was a completion. Whatever the reason, the result is undeniable. By burying their temple, the people of Göbekli Tepe created a perfect time capsule. They protected the pillars from the thousands of years of wind and rain, from the freezing and thawing of the seasons that would have otherwise eroded them into dust. They saved their creation for us. It is because of this final mysterious act that the carvings are still sharp, that the pillars still stand. They created the very potbelly hill that would guard its own secret for the next 10,000 years. It is a deeply moving thought that the last act of this vibrant culture was to ensure the survival of their story, even if they could never know who would one day read it. They put their world to sleep, and in doing so they tucked it away, waiting for a future generation to gently wake it up. They left us the greatest archaeological puzzle in the world, not by accident but by design. Section 9. First the temple, then the city. And so the great temple complex was put to sleep, tucked beneath a blanket of earth made from the remnants of its own glory. The story seems to have ended, but the people who buried their gods did not vanish. They, and the world they inhabited, were on the cusp of the single greatest transformation in human history. And the final revolutionary idea that Göbekli Tepe offers us is that the temple itself, the act of building it, the beliefs that animated it, was not the end of the hunter-gatherer story, but the very engine that created the new world that followed. Let us return to that old, comfortable ladder of progress we have all been taught. First came agriculture, then came settlements, and finally, much later, came temples and complex society. For more than a century, this was the bedrock of our understanding of the past. Agriculture was the spark. It was the prime mover. Everything else followed in its wake. Göbekli Tepe does not just shake this ladder, kicks it over. It looks at the sequence and says, "You have it completely backwards." Let's look again at the timeline. The great enclosures of Göbekli Tepe were built by hunter-gatherers, beginning around 9500 BC. For 1,000 years they came to this hill to build, to feast, and to worship. It was the central organizing principle of their culture. But maintaining this lifestyle, this grand project, was demanding. The great feasts required enormous quantities of wild game. The brewing of the sacred beer required massive harvests of wild grains. As the climate perhaps grew a little less generous, and as the population gathering at the hill may have grown larger, the old ways of simply wandering and gathering might have come under strain. The pressure would have been immense. How do you guarantee you will have enough food for next year's feast? How do you ensure a reliable supply of wild wheat for the ritual beer when the natural meadows are a long walk away? You are faced with a choice. You can abandon the temple, let the gods go hungry, or you can change the way you live to make sure the gods can be fed. This is the revolutionary new theory that Klaus Schmidt championed until his death, and that many archaeologists now see as the most plausible explanation for what happened next. It was the intense, ritual demand of the temple that sparked the invention of agriculture. The temple came first. Imagine a group of builders at Göbekli Tepe. They have finished their work for the season. They have feasted. They are about to return to their nomadic ways. But instead of just consuming all the wild grain they have gathered, perhaps a few of them have an idea. What if we planted some of these seeds near the hill, so that when we come back next year, the wheat will be waiting for us? It would have started as a small act, perhaps even an extension of their ritual offerings to the earth. They were not thinking of becoming farmers. They were simply trying to make their sacred duties a little easier. They were gardening for the gods. And what about the animals? It is a huge effort to follow the migrating gazelle herds for hundreds of miles. But what if you could manage them? What if you could build simple enclosures to hold a few of the animals, to ensure a supply of meat for the next ritual gathering? The first steps towards animal domestication may not have been for creating a stable food supply for villages, but for creating a stable supply of sacrifices for the temple. Around the same time that Göbekli Tepe was being buried, just a few miles away, we see the first evidence in the world of domesticated wheat appearing at other sites. We see the emergence of the first permanent villages, like Navali Kori, where Klaus Schmidt had first seen the T-shaped pillars. These early farmers were the direct descendants of the hunter-gatherers who built the temple. It seems they did not abandon their beliefs when they buried the great circles. Instead, they took the gods with them. The stylized T-shaped figures are found in these first farming villages. But they are smaller now, housed in communal buildings within the settlement. The religion had been domesticated just like the plants and animals. This reverses the entire narrative of our origins. It suggests that civilization did not begin with the practical, economic revolution. It began with the spiritual one. It was not our stomachs that made us settle down. It was our souls. The human imagination, the need to understand our place in the cosmos, the desire to come together in shared belief, these were the catalysts. We first built a house for our gods. And only then, to serve and maintain that divine house, did we build the first permanent houses for ourselves. The city did not give birth to the temple. The temple gave birth to the city. The implications of this are profound. It means that what we call civilization, is not founded on a clever insight about planting seeds. It is founded on the power of a shared story. It was the ability to believe in abstract concepts, in faceless gods, in animal spirits, in a sacred order to the universe that allowed us to cooperate on a scale never before seen. It was the pull of the sacred hill that taught us how to work together. And in learning how to build for the gods, we learned how to build a new world for ourselves. Göbekli Tepe is not just the world's first temple. It may be the true birthplace of the world we now inhabit. Section 10. A New Origin Story. And so, our journey across 12,000 years comes to its quiet culmination on this pot-bellied hill. We began with a mystery of earth and stone, and we end with the mystery of the human heart. We have unearthed the pillars, deciphered the feasts, and felt the chill of a deliberate ritual burial. The pieces of the great puzzle are now assembled before us, and the picture they create is one that changes not just a chapter of our history, but the very nature of the story itself. For so long, we told ourselves a simple, practical tale about our origins. It was a story about our clever hands and our empty stomachs. We learned to cultivate grain, which filled our bellies and freed our hands, and from this practical foundation, our great civilizations grew. It was a good story, a logical story, but it was a story that saw our ancestors as fundamentally pragmatic, driven by necessity. It was a story that left their inner lives, their spirits, as a secondary consequence, a luxury afforded by a full larder. Göbekli Tepe asks us to put this story to bed. It invites us to consider a new origin story, one that is deeper, more resonant, and perhaps more true. It suggests that before we were farmers, we were philosophers. Before we were city dwellers, we were pilgrims. It argues that the great leap forward for humanity was not sparked by a new tool for the hand, but by a new vision in the mind. The true foundation of civilization, it whispers, is not concrete. It is consciousness. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were not primitive or simple. That word should be retired from our vocabulary when we speak of them. To stand on that hill is to stand in the presence of an intellect and a spirit that is entirely profoundly modern. They looked up at the same stars as you. They felt the same chill of mortality. They felt the same awe at the vastness of the universe, and they wrestled with the same fundamental question. What does it all mean? Their answer was to build, to give form to their cosmology, to create a space where they could meet the universe on their own terms. This was the cognitive revolution that truly mattered. The ability to create a shared symbolic world. The power to believe together, in something that you could not see or touch, in faceless gods, in animal spirits, in the sacred power of a specific place on earth. This shared belief is a kind of technology, the most powerful technology humans have ever invented. It allows for cooperation on a massive scale. It is the software that allows the hardware of society to run. Göbekli Tepe is the first great evidence of this software being installed. It was here that we learned that a shared dream is more powerful than a king's command. This should fill us with a sense of deep humility and profound connection. The magnificent, complicated, and often troubled world we inhabit today, with its towering cities, its global networks, and its complex institutions, rests upon this ancient foundation. We are who we are because a group of hunters in the last ice age felt a spiritual hunger so powerful that it drove them to rearrange the world. They were not just building a temple. They were building the idea of society itself. Göbekli Tepe stands today as a quiet monument to this truth. It is a testament to the fact that the human imagination, our ability to tell stories, to create meaning, to believe in things unseen, is not a frivolous byproduct of survival. It is the very engine of survival. It is our greatest gift. Our ancestors did not wait until their lives were easy to ask the big questions. Asking the big questions is how they made their lives possible. The inner world, the world of myth and ritual and belief, is what gave birth to our outer one. As we take our leave of this sacred hill, let the echoes of this story settle gently in your mind. The puzzle of Göbekli Tepe is not just about the past. It is about the very essence of who we are. It reminds us that our capacity for wonder and our search for meaning are the most ancient and powerful parts of our inheritance. The same human spirit that felt compelled to carve a fox into stone and raise a pillar to the sky is the spirit that resides in you. Let this thought be a source of quiet comfort as you drift towards sleep. You are connected by an unbroken thread of consciousness to these first dreamers, these first builders. Rest now in the peace of that deep and ancient connection. Let the pillars and the stars fade, and allow yourself to dream. Good night.